In this lesson, we're going to learn how to finish out a single one of our plants by creating a multi-grow effect to grow the rest of our limbs using layering and masks. So here's where we left off. You can open up 15 stroke effect end. And so here's where we are on this lower curly here. And so we have it animated. However, we don't have it completely animated, because if I turn off the stroke, you'll see we have these little curlies here. We want to animate those as well. However, we can't do it all on the same layer because we can only select a single mask. Now, you might be thinking this all masks will work, and we'll take a look at what this will do here in a second now. But since we're going to be layering this on, let's first pre-comp this. So let's hit Control-Shift-C. And let's make sure we move all attributes into the new composition. And I'm just going to call this lower R curly grow. All right. So now let's go into our comp here. So now we just have a nice layers that we can work with here. Okay, so if we change this to all masks, let's take a look at what that would do. So first, of course, we're going to need to turn off the stroke and draw the rest of these masks. Well, that's pretty simple. We just come in here, draw it, and finish this off. Okay, so now we've finished one of these curlies. So let's see what happens when we say draw all masks. So let's check this on. So far nothing's changed. So now let's move back and see what happens. And of course we'll need to turn back on our stroke effect. Alright, so the main line is getting drawn. Let me just page down. So the main line gets completely drawn, or the first mask gets completely drawn, and then the next mask gets drawn on. Now, depending on the situation, this may be the kind of motion you want. What I would prefer to happen is as soon as this first mask, or this first stroke, hits the break point, we now have two growths, one growing along the main line and another growing along this curly here. Now to do that at the exact same time, we're going to need two layers. So let's take our lower curly here and just Control-D duplicate this. Now as soon as we add in some more layers, I want to make sure to stay organized. So on this bottom one, I'm going to call this main limb. Of course, you can name these however you like. Left limb. But I just prefer to name them based on what masks I'm going to be using. So on our main limb, let's uncheck all masks. And let's just use mask 1, and then our left limb here, let's uncheck all masks and use mask 2. So now we can animate both of these masks growing. Of course, since the keyframes are being held, the second mask, our left limb, grows at the exact same rate as our main mask. Now, of course, we don't want it to start like this because that looks completely unrealistic. So let's find the frame when the main limb hits that first division. So we're about right here, about frame 26. And now let's drag that initial keyframe of the stroke end of the left limb to that frame. So now if I press page up and page down, you can see it starts growing on as soon as it hits. Alright, this is looking really good. Okay, so there's a few issues that I'm noticing. The first one is this white piece here. And this is because our stroke is large enough, or the brush size is large enough that it's revealing something that we don't want it to. So there's a few different ways we can deal with this. We can either decrease the brush size, or we can move the line. And I've found that we probably need to use a mixture of these techniques, because if we move the line too close, it begins creating, or it begins revealing this inner circle here. You'll see here we're starting to reveal that prematurely, so let's Control click and drag this sort of away from it. So remember, we're dealing with something that looks originally like that. So if this helps you sort of pre-visualize what is going to happen, you can feel free to use it. But most of the time, I usually just keep the paint style on reveal and then just page up and page down to preview this motion. Alright, so it looks like we fixed this one. That's looking much nicer, and we're not revealing anything we don't want to. So now let's take a look at this bottom one here, which I believe was revealing a little early. No, it looks, oh, there we go. So for this, again, we just need to move this line out a little bit. And it's completely fine that we do that because remember we're using a pretty wide brush. Okay, so that's looking much better. We still have it a little bit, but I can deal with that. So let's zoom out again and take a look at what we currently have. So now we have it grow on, and then the second part grows on as well. It's looking great. All right, so let's just finish this off by doing the exact same technique using these last two pieces. So I'm just going to duplicate my left limb twice. And so let's call this bottom limb and top limb, just so we can stay clear. And of course, we can select both of these, hit M, and delete all their masks, because we're just going to draw new ones. So let's go to our bottom limb here, turn off the stroke, and let's draw this out. So start at the base of the main limb, and then let's just draw out a curve that goes along this plant. Now you might be saying, well, we're going to have a problem here, but remember, this is going to be growing after this top limb, so it can have some overlap. All right, so that looks good for the bottom limb, but when we turn our stroke on, you'll notice that we don't have that animation. That's because when we deleted our masks, the stroke decided that we didn't want to use the path option. So all we need to do if this happens is go to path and then change it back to mask 1. And now you can see that this is growing out. Now of course, we're going to need to change the timing. So let's hit U, and let's again find the frame we want this to start on. So it's a few frames forward. And now we have it growing out, and let's take a look. Okay. Now you'll notice that it looks pretty good. The animation looked fine. However, if we turn off our stroke, you'll notice we're still missing part of this. So what we need to do is we need to just add some to this mask here. So I'm going to control click the last point here, and then I'm just going to add another point so it sort of reveals the rest of it. And of course, I'll turn my stroke back on. Scroll forward, and we fill it in. All right, so let's just finish this off here. Let's go to our bottom or our top limb, and we're going to want to make the timing exactly the same. So I hit U, and let's just draw on our other limb. So turn off the stroke, and as we've done quite a few times, let's just draw this in. Okay, let's turn our stroke back on, set the mask, and preview it. Okay, it's looking pretty good. It's a little bit slow, so if we want to speed it up, we can drag the right keyframe to the left to make it happen a little bit faster. All right, and here we go. All right, great, looking good. So let's zoom out, and before I call anything finished using this technique, I always want to turn off the stroke and turn it back on to make sure I'm not missing anything. With this technique, it's easy to sort of hide something and then forget it's gone. So always turn off the stroke to make sure that you're revealing the whole object before we sort of call this good to go. All right, but it's looking good, and if we play through it, okay, great. If there's one last thing I would want to do is just sort of offset some of the timing so that everything's not hitting on the same frame here. So let's just grab these last keyframes, and let's just offset them. So we have our main limb, which should probably finish last, and then we have our left limb, and we can finish that a few frames sooner, and our bottom limb, which we could finish a few frames later. So just offsetting that animation will help sort of keep this looking a little better. Okay, so now that we have that done, we can go here and lock it. Let's unsolo it first, and that is complete. So in the next lesson, we'll use these techniques to tackle this object right here.